Okay, so I was saying that no matter how you feel about the news is part of our lives. The news impacts us. I remember talking to an old timer one time, and he remembered being a child and hearing about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And he told me of how he went out in the backyard and was using sticks to shoot down Japanese planes. Folks in another generation can name where they were and how they felt when they heard about John F. Kennedy being assassinated. In yet another generation, people remember where they were and what they were doing on September 11th and the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Folks remember where they were when the wars in Afghanistan or Iran started. We watched on the news as we saw the incredible destruction with natural events like Hurricane Katrina or Superstorm Sandy. We watched the news and the 33 miners who were trapped in Chile and spent almost 70 days trapped in the mine. Or I can tell you where I was and what I was doing when the shootings in Sandy Hook or in Charleston or in Orlando took place. And sometimes the news stories even impact us in a more personal way. I remember getting the Christmas card the year after September 11th, and my old college roommate shared in his Christmas letter about what it was like to be in Tower 2 when the plane in the World Trade Center struck Tower 1. And that event became even more personal for me. I know a guy who joined the military after that particular event and changed the course of his life. Sometimes what we see in the financial news affects our livelihood or our savings or our pension. I myself have been to Hurricane Katrina cleanup mission trips and also in Superstorm Sandy and seen firsthand the results of those events. And through the years, I've known folks who had a friend or a family member who was part of a major news story, and they would describe how hard it was to heal and move on when the news just kept bringing up that event again and again. News is very much a part of our lives, and so maybe it isn't surprising that the early church, as they had to try a way to describe what was happening and what had happened with Jesus, that they chose the description of good news, of the good news. The word gospel that refers to the 4 accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible is Old English for good news. Or the term that we use for evangelism or evangelist comes from a Greek term, euangelion, which in Greek means the good news. They described this event, this description of what happened to Jesus, his life, his death, and his resurrection, they described as good news. I want to have us think about that and wrestle with that a little bit this morning. The good news of Jesus Christ. Because indeed, it is good news. It is news. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but for something to be news, it has to be new. They don't report on the same old stuff. Oh, the reporter comes on, oh, there were no terrorist attacks today in the world. They don't report that. They don't come on the news and say, well, 33 miners left the mine safely today and went on home. They don't report that. They do report when the weather's nice, but not with the intensity and the interest as when there's a natural disaster or something's going wrong. For something to be news, it has to be new. Well, think about this for a moment. The resurrection of Jesus is the newest thing the world has ever seen. Some bright person, I think it was C.S. Lewis, although I couldn't find the exact quote, said something to the effect of all of the graves and all of the tombs in the world. Think about this. The billions of people who have lived throughout all of our history, all of those people, all of those tombs with rotting remains in those tombs, only one of them ever is empty. That is the newest thing that we have ever seen. The most incredible thing. that of all the tombs in all the world, only Jesus is empty. It's amazing. That's incredible. When you think about it, every other news story has precedence before. In fact, I remember on September 11th talking to some older people who had lived through things like the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and they went, "It's okay. We'll get through this. We've been through hard, difficult events like this in the past." There are always precedents. As awful as the incidents of terrorism or violence that we sometimes hear about are, they keep happening. Those events continue to occur. The things that we experience, the weather challenges, those things happen again and again. It's the nature of the weather. But only one tomb ever is empty. Even if you know of someone, there are those stories out there of someone who has been clinically dead for a period of time and comes back, or even in the Bible, Jesus raises a few people from the dead. Those folks always go on to eventually die. Only one person never ever died, and that's Jesus. You know how incredible this news is? It's the only story we keep telling. Think about the stories of iniquity. Was anybody hanging over the water cooler this week going, I was thinking about the conquest of Alexander? Nobody talks about that. Nobody says, I feel real bad for Napoleon at Waterloo. Nobody continues to tell those stories. I was thinking about the fall of Rome and why that happened. Nobody talks about those stories anymore. But this story, the resurrection of Jesus, is a story that continues to be new and to change and transform us. Even those incredible people who lived in the past don't come up the way Jesus does. People don't go, I was thinking about Socrates and how he drank the hemlock at the order of the Athenian jury. No. Even the ones that we remember a holiday for their incredible things like Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King Jr. or I'm sure in India they have a celebration for Gandhi. Even those folks we don't remember as changing our lives the way Jesus has. Jesus is the newest thing ever, and his resurrection is unprecedented. We celebrate that this morning. And it's not just news, it is indeed good news, great news, because we would have to admit, a lot of the news we hear about is not such good news. You know when that really struck me? I used to listen to news radio, and then one day, my son, as he was getting a little older, said, "Daddy, what's a murder?" That was the day I stopped listening to the radio news. Because I didn't want to have to explain to him all the awful stuff that was happening out there. And even the news that is maybe worth reporting that's good news doesn't seem to make the papers. I know that there are Muslim and Jewish people who are getting along real well in the Middle East, but that doesn't make the news. I know that there are buildings that are being built up, and that doesn't make the news, but if they catch on fire, that makes the news. You never hear about the couple that's going to counseling and coming to church and their relationship is getting stronger. But have them have a domestic argument? That makes the newspaper. The good stuff never makes the news. And even the stuff that looks like good stuff often is only because something bad happens. The 33 Chilean miners who came out after, 68 days, that was only news because of the collapse in the first place. Or the outpouring of love that I mentioned in a sermon a couple weeks back for Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. That outpouring of love was only because of the tragedy that took place. And sometimes what qualifies as good news. Just yesterday, as I was finishing up this message, I saw in my email, I get an email from The Patch, the online local newspaper, and it said, The Patch, good news in capitals. And I was like, yeah, what's the good news? The good news was that someone broke the Easter peep eating contest. And Governor Hogan is one of the most popular governors, and some lucky soul won $1 million in a scratch-off. That's what qualified as good news. We have so much better news that we celebrate this morning. We have the best news of all, that the life and the death of Jesus Christ was confirmed. I mean, what he said and what he did is not unprecedented. But when Jesus rose from the dead, it was the proof that who he says he was. And everything is different because of that. Life everlasting, the forgiveness and the relationship we can have with God is the greatest news ever. And it's not just news, and it's not just good or great news, it's news you can use. There used to be a radio station that I would listen to. That was their tagline, news you can use. Because let's face it, a lot of the news we get, we just kind of skim through and we're like, yeah, whatever. Every once in a while, something touches you or kind of connects for you a little bit. Those Chilean miners got all kinds of gifts and support because that made the news. I mentioned that Emmanuel Church and the gifts that they received, people, their hearts were moved about that. Every once in a while in the news, you might find out about a job opportunity or a medication for an ailment you have. You might see that in the news, but for the most part, you just skim through the news and you're like, yeah, whatever. Doesn't interest me. But if you're logging on to CNN.com and you're scrolling through the news and you see Jesus alive, your life can change. Jesus' tomb empty, you can have a relationship with him. That is news you can use. That is news that will change our lives. That Jesus is God. That he is worthy to be followed. That he's worthy to pay attention to. That's news that can change us. News you can use. That we can have a relationship with Jesus. That he loves us and cares for us. And we can be friends with him. We can be a partner with him in life. That's news that we can use. That we are loved completely and unconditionally by God. That's the message of the cross. And as I said, that is not unprecedented news that somebody would die for others, but that this somebody was proven to be the Son of God by his resurrection means that God loves you more than you can ever possibly imagine. That is news that you can use. That we not fear death, because Jesus promised us life everlasting, that we would have life as he had life. That's news we can use. That he can guide and transform and change our lives is news we can use. So let me give you just a couple of next steps, just a couple of simple things to think about, to maybe go a little deeper into this. So one thing is, if you haven't ever been here before, you haven't been here in a long time, fill out the connection card, the yellow insert. We won't sell your information to anybody else, but we will add you to all the communication that comes out from St. Paul's to let you know about all the things that we are doing in this congregation to help you grow in faith. Especially if you have an email address, we'll add you to those communications, so you can grow in faith. It's one simple, easy thing. One thing you could do that might be even a little bit more than that is flip it over on the back side. Mark down one of the things on there. Mark down, contact the pastor. I'd love to have coffee with you or sit and talk a little bit about how you could grow in faith. You might be surprised at this. This is my job, to help you grow in faith. You don't mark that off and I just sit in my office and wait. Just sit in my office and wait. Because that's what I'm here for. Our mission statement is helping people grow with Jesus. That's my job. I want to help you do that if you want to do that a little bit. Or maybe something else that might help. If you don't have an easy, good Bible, take the one that's in the pew home. We buy them to give them away. If that story that I read from the Gospel of Matthew, if you wonder what happened before that story, take one of the Bibles home and start reading in the Gospel of Matthew. Find out all the things that led to that glorious day, that glorious resurrection, that good news. Or if you're interested, we have a new members class that starts next Sunday evening at 7 p.m. And whether you're interested in joining or not, that class is really designed around growing in faith. So you could take the class and, audit it if you want or not join or whatever, but it would help you grow in faith. Take a next step. Whatever that next step is for you. What I absolutely don't want you to do is leave this morning and go, oh yeah, that was nice. Jesus rose from the dead. Okay, life as usual. Because it is not life as usual at all. It is the most amazing, incredible, good news ever that has the power to change our lives. Amen.